谢谢主席。
Thank you, President. I thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing and support his call for de-escalation and return to diplomatic negotiations. Today, the United States and Israel brazenly launched military strikes against targets inside Iran, causing a sudden escalation of regional tensions. China is deeply concerned about this development. China consistently advocates that all parties should abide by the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and opposes and condemns the use or threat of force in international relations. China stresses that the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Iran and other regional countries must be respected. China is deeply saddened by the large number of civilian casualties caused by the conflict. At all times, the red line for protecting civilians in armed conflict must not be crossed, and the indiscriminate use of force is unacceptable. China calls on all parties to fulfill their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, effectively ensure the safety of civilians and avoid attacks on civilian facilities. The use of force is not the right way to settle international disputes. It only intensifies hatred and confrontation. The escalation and spillover of tensions in the Middle East serves no one's interests. Dialogue and negotiations are the only way to resolve differences. China calls on an immediate cessation of military actions to prevent further cycles of escalation. The military strikes occurred at a time when the US and Iran were engaged in diplomatic negotiations, which is shocking. The parties concerned should demonstrate political sincerity, resume dialogue and negotiations as soon as possible, and return to the right track of a political solution. China stands ready to work with the international community to advance peace efforts and help restore peace and stability in the Middle East at an early date. I thank you, President.
Thank you, President. I would like to thank the Secretary General for his sobering presentation and assessment of the unfolding situation in the Middle East after concerning developments in the region. We concur with his view that there is no viable alternative to a peaceful settlement. President,
the United States is a war addict. Those are the words of China's defense ministry, delivered on Saturday while American missiles were still falling on Tehran. Throughout its over 240-year history, the spokesman said, the United States has been at war for all but 16 years. It has 800 overseas military bases in over 80 countries and regions. The US is the main cause of international disorder, global turbulence, and regional instability. Beijing did not whisper its condemnation, it broadcast it. Hours later, at an emergency session of the UN Security Council convened at China and Russia's request, Ambassador Fu Cong delivered Beijing's formal position. Today, he said, the United States and Israel brazenly launched a military strike against Iran's territory, leading to a sudden escalation in the regional situation. China is deeply concerned about this. Fu said China has consistently advocated that all parties should adhere to the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter. He said China opposes and condemns the use of force or the threat of force in international relations, and he said the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Iran and other regional countries must be respected. Then the ambassador turned to the casualties. China is deeply saddened by the large number of civilian deaths caused by the conflict, he said. Civilians must be protected at all times during armed conflicts. The red lines must not be crossed, and the indiscriminate use of force is unacceptable. Fu called on all parties to fulfill their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, to effectively ensure the safety of civilians and avoid attacking civilian facilities. The UN Secretary General had just briefed the Council that Iranian media reported at least 85 dead at a girls' school in Minab. 2 more were reported killed at a school in Tehran. Fu did not need to name the targets. The numbers spoke for themselves. But it was the timing that drew Beijing's sharpest language. The military strikes occurring amid ongoing diplomatic negotiations between the US and Iran are shocking, Fu said. The Geneva talks had just completed their third round. Oman's foreign minister had described a historic breakthrough on Friday. Technical negotiations were scheduled in Vienna for the following week, and then the bombs fell. Fu said all parties concerned should demonstrate political sincerity, resume dialogue and negotiations as soon as possible, and return to the correct path of a political solution. While Fu Cong spoke in New York, Beijing's foreign ministry issued its own statement. It declared China's support for Iran's national sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. It demanded an immediate halt to military operations, and it called on the United States to resume dialogue and negotiation to maintain peace and stability in the Middle East. The state-controlled China Daily published an editorial the same day saying that American and Israeli action against Iran ignores international law and follows a pattern of increasing belligerence. China's words were not entirely improvised. The day before the strikes, Xinhua, China's state news agency, reported that Beijing had advised its citizens to avoid traveling to Iran and urged those already there to leave as soon as possible. The advisory cited rising regional tensions and security risks. The Chinese embassy in Tel Aviv also told citizens to strengthen personal security measures and remain prepared for emergencies. Beijing appeared to know what was coming before the first bombs landed. China's condemnation is not just diplomatic, it is existential. According to data from energy consulting firm Kpler, China is the world's largest crude importer and the biggest buyer of Iranian oil, purchasing more than 80% of Iran's shipped crude. About half of all Chinese oil imports transit through the Strait of Hormuz. The narrow waterway, barely 33 kilometers at its tightest point, handles roughly 20 million barrels per day, or about a fifth of global oil demand. When Iran's Revolutionary Guards broadcast over maritime radio that no ship is allowed to pass the Strait of Hormuz, as reported by the European Union naval mission ADDICTS, the threat was aimed at Washington, but the damage falls on Beijing. Reuters reported that some major oil companies and trading houses suspended shipments through the strait within hours of the strikes. Bloomberg confirmed that shipping remains largely paused, with vessels turning back or staying in port. On Sunday, a trickle of ships were moving out of the waterway, but none appeared to be entering. If this pause becomes a blockade, energy analysts at CNBC warned it would trigger what one called the mother of all bidding wars among Asian importers. A prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz, one analyst said, is a guaranteed global recession. China's exposure is not abstract. Kpler data show China purchased an average of 1.38 million barrels per day of Iranian oil last year, representing about 13% of its total seaborne imports. Most of that crude goes to independent refiners in Shandong province known as teapots, small operations that run on narrow margins and depend on Iranian oil, because it comes at a steep discount under US sanctions. If the strait closes, those refiners lose their cheapest supply first. And there is no quick substitute. The Strait of Hormuz connects every major Gulf producer to the open sea. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, Kuwait, and Qatar all ship through it. There is no alternate route for the volumes involved. Back at the Security Council, the fault lines were clear. According to reporting by PassBlue and the Associated Press, most of the 15 council members fell short of explicitly condemning the United States and Israel. The European members, Britain, Denmark, France, Greece, and Latvia, condemned Iran's retaliatory strikes on Gulf states, but did not condemn the US-Israeli operation that preceded them. Only a handful of countries used direct language. China called the strikes brazen. Russia called them an unprovoked act of armed aggression. Pakistan condemned what it described as unwarranted attacks against Iran. The Arab League's observer noted that Israel refuses to subject its own nuclear facilities to IAEA inspection while justifying strikes on Iran's nuclear program. Iran's ambassador Amir Saeed Iravani posed the question the council could not answer. The issue before this body is straightforward, he said. Whether any member state, including a permanent member of this council, may through the use of force, coercion, or aggression determine the political future or system of another state. He accused the council of a blatant double standard, condemning retaliation while ignoring the aggression that provoked it. During his speech, Iravani did not address reports that Supreme Leader Khamenei had been killed in the strikes. And here is the detail that no one in the chamber could ignore. The emergency session took place on February 28th. the last day of the United Kingdom's presidency of the Security Council. On March 1st, the rotating presidency passes to the United States. The country that launched the strikes will now chair the body tasked with responding to them. China's Fu Cong called for political sincerity. Whether that sincerity survives a Security Council chaired by Washington during a war Washington started is the question Beijing left on the table. Subscribe to WLA for daily geopolitical analysis.